Now, I like questions, no statements, and wait for the microphone.
Good morning. I want to thank you, Tony, for inviting me as a diversity and inclusion educator myself. So I love this Embrace Race. I have a question, and I actually have a solution.
Okay.
My question is this. Albert Einstein has a great quote that says, if you want to solve a problem, it says, you cannot solve a problem with the same consciousness that created it. You must stand on a higher ground. So I would like your thought about that question. Do we have to focus on our consciousness? Then in terms of a solution, I invite all of us to check out World Unit Inc. because we have a song that can help all of us embrace diversity. The song was performed at the United Nations by children. So if you go to worldunitinc.org and the Facebook page, you will see 429 children singing this amazing song, and they're even doing it in sign language. So again, I would like your thoughts about this quote by Einstein.
Well, thank you for your question. Certainly, I believe we need to bring ourselves to a higher consciousness. And I do what I do, hoping to have some avenues to do that for folks. Because the ways we typically talk about race issues and other issues are you for or against? And so I do think storytelling is a way to get at those issues with a higher level of consciousness.
Thank you.
Next. Up here in the front.
Hi, my name is Tina. I'd love to know what that song was that was just referred to. There are a lot of references to things I was trying to write down. I didn't catch them all, but I've learned in the diversity dialogues here about hidden bias and about the problem with colorblindness, which has helped me to understand things that I didn't know, to learn things I didn't know before. And you mentioned a couple terms. I think it was something about transparency and normalcy. Could you say what those terms were again?
So white transparency is the idea that that everyone is ethnic except white folks. White normalcy is the idea that everything white is the standard, right, and everyone else is a variation on that.
Which explains why in news reports, a man robbed a bank,
right,
unless it's a black man,
right,
or an Asian man.
Right.
Okay.
Similarly, I heard information about the way language is used and how some languages that use gender pronouns and some that don't completely bias us in terms of how we view what sexuality, people's gender. So my question is that I didn't know what I didn't know until I started coming to these diversity dialogues and hearing stories from people who had experiences different than mine. I didn't even know there was something to even know about.
Right.
So that's been very, very eye-opening for me, and I've now tried to really expose myself and find out more about other people's experiences, definitely along issues of race, because I know there's a lot I don't know and to learn, but other things too, religion and such, and gender, and the many things that make us different but bring so much to the table. My question, and you were just sort of beginning to address this, is I want to have those conversations, and it's how to have them, and some examples were just given, but it's tripping over the language even, and I've asked people of color what they want to be called. Do you want somebody with darker skin, do you want to be called African American? And some people are like, yes. Some people say black. Some people are like, I'm Indian American. So many different things. So how to have that conversation? Like, I want to initiate it. I have a grandchild. I want to get over this colorblindness thing. I want to talk about race. I want to identify it. But I want to move this forward in a positive way and trying to understand how to do that with, my grandchildren, but also with people who are different from me, and how to do it in a way that's not going to come across as, here's that token conversation.
All right. I want you to have time to answer.
Oh, okay. Lost my train of thought. One word of direction I would give is recognize that you're not going to, these are difficult conversations, partly because of the things you just described. I don't even know what this person wants to be called. And so that's why we don't have the conversations, because they're difficult, because we don't know that. And it's just being courageous enough to enter into it. Maybe to ask that question, what do you want to be called? You'll notice that almost exclusively in my talk, I use black and white. It's really because it's easy for what I'm talking about here. I refer to myself as African American sometimes, black sometimes, probably black more than anything because it's my generation. But I think what you're talking about is some of the factors that keep us from entering into these conversations. Recognize that you're not going to say everything right, and recognize that you really, if you're serious about this, you're going to do more listening than talking anyway. So that's what I would say.
Here's a hand over here.
Hi, thank you. So you just said in your talk you specifically used the terms black and white, but what had struck me when you were talking about driving your grandson's basketball team is the three kids were white, Honduran, and African. So you have
Right.
a race, a color, you have a country, and you have a whole continent.
Right.
And I'm curious if that was deliberate or why that was chosen, or the larger question is, how do we talk about people? And these words are so important, and that it struck me because it really did stick out as just three different, very different ways to describe these boys that are on the same team.
You're right. You caught me. I mean, yeah. The white boys were white Americans. The Honduran boy is, I was trying to be specific because I just learned that he was Honduran. And the African guy, I'm only guessing that he's African. And so I was distinguishing him from African American, but I don't really know where he's from. I suspect it's East Africa, but I don't know. I just know what he looks like. And so, I was not very clean with those distinctions.
And are they all American, just to follow up? So
As far as I know,
American?
they're all American. I don't know if any of them were born outside of the country. I don't know.
I just think it's,
yeah.
our president recently was in a meeting with a high-level a Japanese woman, a Korean woman, I'm sorry, and he saw her while there was some conversation going on in the room and said, "Who's the pretty Asian lady?" And she was described as a high-level defense, security, whatever she was, or is. And he said, "Oh, maybe we can get her, but she doesn't do what he thought she did. And maybe we can get her to do something that had nothing to do with her life or work because she was the pretty Asian woman." So and not understanding that she was Asian American, just saying.
But your question and your perception and your question demonstrates why we won't. Demonstrates what Tina was talking about. Why we don't want to have these what if I say the wrong thing? Well, I clearly said the wrong thing. Partly because I don't have enough information about these boys to know exactly where they're from. But yeah, I used skin color, I used a continent, I used a country. You're right. Yeah.
Over here. Up here in the, oh, okay. I meant in the front, but that's fine. Okay.
Hi, I'm hiding in the back. So I got your back. Merida is the first white Disney princess.
Okay.
Brave.
Okay.
Ethnically.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I actually had a question about whiteness. First of all, thank you for roping in, everyone into the conversation, because I know it can be really hard to, address issues of race across racial identities. So thank you for that. But I have a question about the development of whiteness over time, because so far we've only talked about it as a monolithic identity that has never changed. But depending on when you look at Merida, right, she's a Scottish woman, so she wasn't always white. How do you talk about the changes in the definition and the mutability of whiteness and how it fits into the greater context of race?
I think that's where we want to go. Part of my, what I think is my mission right now is to expose whiteness. And when I say expose, I don't mean for all its evils. I mean, one book says making whiteness visible. The questions I'm asking, I said, are only scratching the surface. I say over and over in this talk, let's talk to our kids about race, tell them why there's black and white. And I don't say anything about why there's black and white in this talk. The why is the real conversation. And I think that's what you're getting at. It's a historical why. Irish folks were not always white. Italian folks were not always white. Sometimes are, sometimes aren't. Scottish folks were not always white. So where did whiteness come from? That's the big question. But in what I'm doing right now, I can't start with that question. I have to start with something, in these sorts of situations, I have to start with something that will open folks up, because I want to get to that question, where did whiteness come from? And that's a bigger question than where did blackness come from, even though they came from the same place, But the real question is, where did whiteness come from?
And probably somebody in this room can tell me the scholar who wrote How the Irish Became White, which is pretty well-known book and very instructive along those lines over here.
Hello. You started off saying that your intended audience was white people. And so I wondered how your conversations would change if it was a white grandparent or white parent with a black child or black grandchild.
Well, there's a gentleman who saw this TED Talk and contacted me because he had just adopted brothers. See, you got me. One is, they're both biracial. One is Hispanic and white. I don't know what his Hispanic side comes from. The other is African American and white. So the man is white. Good question. The man is white, and he's adopted these two brothers, half-brothers, who are each half-white. But it's mainly the 3-year-old, the African American son, who he contacted me about, because he said to me, Caden is teaching me so much about things I've never thought of before. He's 3 years old. And so what's happened is not that I'm dictating to Sam what he should do, but Sam wants to ask me some questions because of what Caden is saying to him. And Caden is very aware that he's the only African American in his family, and mostly in the world around him. But he said his dad said to, Sam said he said to Caden one day, around some racial issue, he said, I'm sorry, Caden, I just don't, I don't really know how to answer that question. And Caden said, that's okay, Daddy, I'll teach you. So it would be, I threw this talk out there. I didn't say only white people watch it. But I think the message for the segment of white folks that I envisioned is different from the rest of society, only because the rest of us have some place to grip to start those conversations. But to go deeper in those conversations, this question about where whiteness came from, where blackness came from, especially those ethnicities, I think those are questions for all of us. I think that's something for all of us to explore. Yeah.
I would add this. There's a brand new book. I cannot pronounce the author's name. I'm so sorry. So it's called So You Want to Talk About Race. I heard her interviewed on The Takeaway yesterday, and she referred to her mom as saying she raised black kids, but she did not know how to be black, which is the distinction that she made. But she had great, obviously, love and fondness for her mom. But anyway, here's a new book. It's all about talking about race. People are interested. Over here.
Hi, my name's Chris. Thank you very much for being here and for this discussion. My husband's West African, and we have 2 children together. When my son was maybe 3 or 4, he wanted to play good guys, bad guys, and he said, you know, Daddy, you be the bad guy. And I questioned him on that, and he said it was because he was black. And I just want to challenge a little bit the Elsa thing, because I also have a friend who's black, and her husband is black, and she experienced something similar with her son. And so I think even though things are changing and getting better, even at such a young age where our kids didn't watch that much TV, they were influenced by the media and things around them, and it's an opportunity to press a little more and have those conversations. For me, my question is, in a practical way, in this work setting, how to address some of the issues that come up. For example, we mentor Year Up students, so something that I've heard along the way, some of these kids, I would say, speak a different dialect of English, if you want to put it that way. And we're mentoring them and we're coaching them to be in the workplace. And so I've heard them be advised, or in a loving, trying to coaching way, to change the way that they talk. And I just would like you to address that, please.
I don't have an answer. I actually have taught mostly adult students. I teach Bible, I teach ethics at Trevecca Nazarene University. And because these are adult students, they're folks who, for the most part, have it's undergraduate, it's degree completion. They're folks who have been out of school for a long time and are coming back to complete a degree. Most of them have been either at home or working in not executive level jobs. And I have to grade their papers. And part of my background is in editing. And I'm reading these papers, and they write like they talk, and it is not on a even bare minimum scholarly level. So I've really just begun my EDD program. So one of my dissertation topics that I'm considering is helping those folks who don't write with standard English to learn to write with standard English. But it's only about in this case, it's only about their writing, because the folks I'm talking about are from a variety of ethnicities, mainly rural or urban. And so it's the same phenomenon, even though culturally they're coming from different different places. And so I'm able to address those issues as an instructor grading papers in a way that has nothing to do with their ethnicity. It has everything to do with what is considered scholarly writing. A theory I have is that if you learn to write, then you learn to talk at the level that is acceptable in the profession you want to be in. But I'm well aware that these are all sticky issues because are we saying suppress your upbringing, suppress your language that is fully communicable, but in professions that have decided this is the kind of language you have to have. So I don't have any real answers other than I recognize that's a significant issue, and maybe there's little pieces like the writing piece where we can say that this is acceptable scholarly writing and this is not.
I also think that it may be interesting for your students or your mentees to understand that pretty much all of us who have ascended to certain places in corporate America certainly speak two languages, flat out.
Right.
And I know when to speak the other one
Right.
and when not.
Right.
And so it's bilingual. And
Yeah.
so that's just an understanding that they have to know. And over here in this setting, this is one way. Over here in this setting, it's another way. Because you're just not going to take that part of me, that Black Santa part away from me. You're just not going to. And this is how I preserve it.
I think about the former president, President Obama.
Exactly.
And if you watch his speeches and you see him speaking in predominantly Black settings, he talks differently. And I don't think it's intentional. I think it's natural. It's automatic. In fact, he's from Hawaii. I'm from Hawaii. We went to high school together.
Oh, no brag. Go ahead.
But when I go back to Hawaii, I mean, it's been years now, but when I go back to Hawaii and people are talking pidgin English, I automatically start talking pidgin English. It's just natural. And he's a great example of how that just happens naturally in his setting. He's not putting on anything. It just happens automatically for him.
Same thing for me when I go south.
Yes.
Because, Miss Betty, how you doing? Fine, and you?
Well, that's helpful
Absolutely,
to
that's
me
my
that
conversation.
you say
Yeah.
two languages, because when
Yeah.
I hear things like that, you know, that's just helpful for me because I want to be able to validate the kids and not have them
Right.
feel like somebody's trying to change them, and that's not going to be addressed at all.
Well, that's why I think that it's important to have somebody that looks like them to say that, to understand that there is another world. Just a little story about President Obama from a friend of mine. When in his first term, I'm sure he did it more than this, policymaker was working with him about some economic thing and texted him and said, what do you think about, I think so-and-so and so-and-so, and his answer was, they were both Black, he's Black, of course you know, and the other person was too, and he wrote back, true dat. And she was like, oh my God, this is the president, true dat. She saved it.
We have time for one more question.
Over
There's a
here.
hand up in the front.
Oh, there's
Oh,
one in the
there's a
back.
hand. Two more questions.
Okay.
This one in the hand in the
Yes.
front.
Thank you for bringing up this discussion. I agree with you that people don't want to be racist, but how they behave today is very hard to get rid of that influence. So suppose if we have magic that the racist problem is solved with a blink of eye, how would you describe the society, and how would you describe a person who isn't racist, and how would he behave in that society? Thank you.
Very good question. I kind of hint at this towards the end of that talk. The vision I have is a place where race is not erased, but race is embraced. I know that. It's where your ethnicity matters and only as a gift to the rest of us. I lived in Hawaii for 7 years, graduated from high school there. You know, folks in Hawaii don't have everything right, but they've had to deal with multiple races and multiple cultures, multiple ethnicities in one place for a long time. And the thing about Hawaii is everybody is proud of who they are. Whether they're one ethnicity as we define them or a mix of a bunch of them as we define them. The whole idea is I'm proud of me and I love you for who you are. And it's not that your ethnicity doesn't matter. It absolutely matters. It absolutely matters in how we interact with each other and how you are as a person. But so for me, that magical place would be more of that. Now, are there racial tensions in Hawaii? Of course. So in that magical place, there wouldn't be racial tensions. There would only be racial harmony. We're never going to get there, but we can get closer to there.
Up here, last one.
Thank you for being here. My name's Katie. I really appreciate you for sharing your personal story and for encouraging us to do the same. And it strikes me because we are at a school. Where do you think this technique or this approach of sharing personal stories ought to be built into elementary school curriculum or high school curriculum or even here within higher education?
I think a lot of elementary schools are, and I'm speaking for my area in Nashville. Damon, Chelsea, Zoe, Elliot, and Autumn all go to multi-ethnic schools. Elliot and Autumn go to a charter school where they are very explicit about different ethnicities, who's there, what we can learn from one another, that sort of thing. The other three go to schools where it's not explicitly, that I know of, addressed, but they, Chelsea and Zoe go to a school that is 80% Mexican. And they're two little blonde white girls. So there's a lot of Spanish immersion, Hispanic immersion there for them. So those issues get addressed ethnically in that situation, just to have the school run. George Yancey has a book called Neither Jew Nor Gentile, and Yancey's a sociologist who deals with some of these issues. But he studied Protestant universities. So, Christian universities, non-Catholic Christian universities. And he wanted to know what are the best practices to help include, to help develop inclusion and diversity on your campus. And he came up with 3 things. One, semi-effective, and that is having forums or something on campus to help address diversity, inclusion, equity issues. But he said the other 2 that are more powerful is to have actual courses where folks have to address issues of diversity, and specifically racial diversity, and maybe make those required. Because what they found with those courses is that everyone benefits, but the greatest benefit is for white folks. And they report how great a benefit it is for them because they had never thought about these things before, they never had to. And then the other thing, and you alluded to this, is to hire people of color. And he's very specific about in hiring those people of color as faculty and staff. Even they, and this will be controversial, they have to be the right folks. Because if they're coming and they're teaching these courses and they're sort of antagonistic or belligerent, then that's not going to help the situation. So they have to be people willing to facilitate a peaceful but maybe contentious situation. So does that help?
Thank you.
Thank you, Tony Peterson.